Welcome, fellow mortality enthusiasts, to another journey into the darker corners of human belief. Tonight, we're exploring one of humanity's most enduring obsessions: what happens after we die. If you've ever found comfort in modern spiritual movements promising everyone gets to heaven, or assumed ancient peoples had quaint, simple beliefs about the afterlife, prepare to have those notions thoroughly demolished. By the time we finish this grim tour through history's visions of death, you may be grateful that your biggest afterlife worry is whether there's Wi-Fi in paradise, rather than whether you'll be devoured by demons, tortured for millennia, or trapped in an eternal bureaucracy of cosmic judgment. Before we begin our descent into humanity's collective nightmares about death, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. And let me know in the comments what other historical beliefs you'd like me to traumatize you with next. Now, let's die 1,000 deaths across the centuries and discover why being dead was rarely considered a vacation from life's troubles. More often, it was where the real problems began. Ancient Egypt, the afterlife's first obstacle course. Imagine opening your eyes in the Egyptian underworld, circa 1350 BCE. You're dead. Congratulations. But your troubles are just beginning. Contrary to popular belief, ancient Egyptians didn't simply mummify bodies and sail off to eternal bliss. What awaited the deceased was essentially a supernatural obstacle course designed by cosmic sadists, where failure meant not just death, you were already dead, but complete obliteration of your soul. A concept so terrifying it makes modern fears of hell seem quaint. You find yourself standing in the hall of two truths, facing 42 divine judges who look like they've never smiled in their eternal existence. Each judge specializes in a particular sin, and you must convince all of them that you've never committed their specific transgression. This isn't a simple confession booth. It's a prosecutorial tribunal where divine beings with animal heads interrogate you about every moment of your earthly existence. I have not stolen bread, you declare to the first judge, hoping your voice doesn't betray the terror you feel. But wait, did you ever take an extra portion when food was scarce? Did you fail to share with someone hungrier? The judges aren't interested in your intentions or circumstances. They want absolute moral perfection, and anything less means spiritual annihilation. The questioning continues relentlessly. I have not killed. I have not lied. I have not been sexually promiscuous. I have not caused anyone to weep. Each declaration must be absolutely true, because these divine prosecutors can see directly into your soul's history. Modern people struggle with white lies and minor ethical compromises. Imagine facing eternal judgment, where every small moral failure could damn you to non-existence. But here's where Egyptian afterlife beliefs get truly nightmarish. Even if you somehow pass this 42-part moral examination, your ordeal has barely begun. Next comes the weighing of your heart against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. Your actual heart, the organ Egyptians believed contained your moral essence, gets placed on a cosmic scale while you watch, helpless to influence the outcome. If your heart weighs more than the feather, corrupted by sin and moral failings, a monster called Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, immediately devours it, erasing your soul from existence forever. No second chances, no appeals, no divine mercy. You simply cease to exist in any form, which the Egyptians considered far worse than any torture. At least in hell you still exist. Here, you become nothing at all. Let's assume you're one of the lucky few whose heart somehow balances perfectly with the feather of truth. Congratulations. You've now earned the right to proceed to the next phase of your eternal existence. But don't start celebrating yet, because what awaits you isn't the peaceful paradise of modern imagination. Instead, you face a journey through the underworld that makes Dante's Inferno look like a pleasant hiking trail. The Egyptian underworld, called the Duat, is populated by demons, monsters, and hostile spirits who exist solely to torment the dead. You must navigate lakes of fire, avoid serpents large enough to swallow boats, and convince various monstrous gatekeepers to let you pass through their domains. Each challenge which requires specific magical knowledge, spells, passwords, and ritual gestures that you needed to memorize while alive or have written on papyrus placed in your tomb. Imagine being dead and having to remember hundreds of magical passwords while under attack by supernatural monsters. Oh, wait, is it I am the flame that shines in the darkness, or I am the darkness that devours flame? Get it wrong, and a demon with the head of a baboon and the body of a scorpion tears your soul apart. This is why wealthy Egyptians were buried with copies of the Book of the Dead, essentially a supernatural cheat sheet for navigating the afterlife's deadly bureaucracy. But here's the cruelest irony of Egyptian afterlife beliefs. Even if you successfully navigate all these challenges and reach the blessed realm of the field of reeds, what awaits you is eternal agricultural labor. That's right. Your reward for moral perfection and supernatural survival skills is the privilege of farming forever in the afterlife. You get to plant crops, harvest grain, and maintain irrigation canals for all eternity, just like the peasants did in life, except now you can never rest, never take a break, and never die to escape the monotony. The wealthy tried to game this system by having themselves buried with Shabti figures, small statues magically programmed to do the deceased's eternal farm work. But this created its own problems. What if the magic failed? What if you didn't have enough Shabtis? What if other dead people's Shabtis were better than yours? The Egyptian afterlife managed to extend earthly class anxieties into eternity, where even death couldn't escape social hierarchies and economic competition. Perhaps most disturbing of all, Egyptian afterlife beliefs assumed that most people would fail these tests. The elaborate mummification process, expensive tomb construction, and complex magical preparations were essentially insurance policies against almost certain spiritual destruction. Families bankrupted themselves trying to give their deceased relatives even a slim chance of avoiding obliteration, knowing that the odds were heavily stacked against survival. The psychological impact of these beliefs on living Egyptians was profound. Every moral choice carried potentially eternal consequences, not in terms of reward or punishment, but existence or non-existence. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the standards couldn't be more impossible to meet. Modern anxiety about divine judgment seems manageable compared to the Egyptian fear that a single moral lapse could erase your soul from reality forever. Consider the farmer who took an extra handful of grain during a famine to feed his starving children. By modern moral standards, this might be considered virtuous, prioritizing family welfare over property rights. But in the Egyptian cosmic court, this would be theft, automatically disqualifying him from eternal existence regardless of his motivations or circumstances. The divine judges weren't interested in context, necessity, or moral complexity, only absolute compliance with rigid behavioral codes. Or imagine the merchant who occasionally inflated prices during shortages, a common practice that modern economics would call market adjustment. To the Egyptian afterlife tribunal, this would constitute both theft and causing others to suffer, earning double condemnation. The merchant's family might spend their entire fortune on mummification and tomb goods, but his soul would still face probable destruction because economic survival required moral compromises incompatible with divine perfection. Women faced particular challenges in Egyptian afterlife beliefs. The declaration, "I have not been sexually promiscuous," carried different implications for women than men in a society with complex marriage customs, and where women's sexual autonomy was severely restricted. A woman who remarried after widowhood, had relationships outside socially approved channels, or even attracted unwanted attention, might find her eternal existence threatened by standards that reflected earthly gender inequalities rather than universal moral principles. The Egyptian afterlife wasn't just difficult. It was designed to be nearly impossible for ordinary people to navigate successfully. The elaborate religious machinery surrounding death served partly to comfort the living, but primarily to extract wealth from families desperate to improve their deceased relatives' chances of avoiding spiritual annihilation. Priests, embalmers, craftsmen, and magical specialists all profited from the terror of post-mortem obliteration, creating an entire economy based on death anxiety. Yet perhaps the most chilling aspect of Egyptian afterlife beliefs was their logical consistency. If consciousness survived death, if moral choices had cosmic significance, and if divine justice operated by absolute standards, then something like the Egyptian system made perfect sense. The horror lay not in its irrationality, but in its terrifying rationality. A coherent theological system that took the implications of moral judgment to their logical extreme. As you continue your imaginary journey through the Egyptian underworld, successfully navigating flaming lakes and outsmarting demon guards through memorized spells, you begin to appreciate why these beliefs dominated one of history's most successful civilizations for over 3 millennia. They provided meaning, purpose, and structure to earthly existence, while simultaneously creating such overwhelming anxiety about death that people would do anything to improve their chances of afterlife survival. Finally, after eons of supernatural trials, you reach the Field of Reeds, the Egyptian paradise, where successful souls spend eternity. The landscape is beautiful, the climate perfect, the Nile flood always optimal for farming. But as you pick up your eternal hoe to begin your first day of infinite agricultural labor, a sobering thought occurs. Is this reward really better than the oblivion you worked so hard to avoid? At least non-existence wouldn't involve eternal farming. Welcome to the ancient world's most sophisticated afterlife, a cosmic system so terrifying in its moral demands and so bleak in its ultimate rewards that it makes modern visions of hell seem almost cheerful by comparison. The Egyptians didn't just believe in life after death, they believed in judgment, trial, probable failure, and if you were incredibly lucky, eternal tedium, sweet dreams, Greek Hades, democracy of misery. If Egyptian afterlife beliefs were an impossible obstacle course, the Greek underworld was more like a cosmic waiting room where everyone was equally miserable forever. Welcome to Hades, where democracy finally achieved its ultimate expression, universal, eternal, gray despair for all social classes. The Greeks managed to create an afterlife so depressing that it made earthly existence look like a carnival by comparison. Picture yourself as a deceased Greek citizen around 400 BCE, floating across the river Styx with Charon, the ferryman who's never met a customer he liked. You've paid your coin. Hopefully, your relatives remembered to place one under your tongue at burial, and now you're approaching a realm that makes modern waiting rooms seem like luxury resorts. The first thing you notice is the atmosphere, or rather, the lack of one. Everything exists in perpetual twilight, neither day nor night. Just endless, grayish gloom that perfectly matches the mood of every soul you're about to meet. Charon deposits you on the far shore with the enthusiasm of a DMV employee at closing time, and you join the shuffling masses of the dead walking aimlessly through a landscape of profound mediocrity. Forget the elaborate geography of Egyptian afterlife or the dramatic punishments of later Christian hell. The Greek underworld is mostly just empty. Vast gray plains stretch endlessly in all directions, populated by the shades of the dead who stand around looking confused and depressed, like conference attendees who've lost their name tags. These aren't really you, mind you. They're shades, pale imitations of your former self with all the personality and vitality drained away. Imagine having your emotional range permanently reduced to vaguely melancholy, while retaining enough consciousness to remember what it felt like to experience joy, anger, passion, or even irritation. You can think, but not clearly. You can remember, but only dimly. You can communicate, but conversations tend to peter out quickly when everyone's equally apathetic about everything. The democratic nature of Greek Hades becomes apparent as you observe your fellow shades. That might be Pericles over there, looking just as aimlessly confused as the slave who died in his household. The great warrior Achilles shuffles nearby with the same listless expression as the coward who fled from battle. Death has achieved what life never could, perfect equality through universal misery. Kings and commoners, heroes and villains, all reduced to the same gray shadow existence with identical capacity for cosmic boredom. But here's where Greek afterlife beliefs reveal their particular genius for psychological torment. You retain enough memory and consciousness to understand exactly what you've lost. You remember the taste of wine, but can't taste anything now. You recall the warmth of sunlight on your skin, but exist in perpetual chill twilight. You can think about the people you loved, but can't feel love anymore. Just a dim recollection of what that emotion once felt like trying to remember a song you've forgotten the melody to. Homer captured this existential horror perfectly when he depicted the shade of Achilles telling Odysseus that he would rather be the lowliest slave among the living than a king among the dead. This wasn't false modesty. It was the recognition that even the most miserable earthly existence contained more genuine experience than the best possible afterlife in Hades. The greatest Greek hero was essentially saying that being alive and suffering was infinitely preferable to being dead and not quite existing. The few exceptions to universal gray mediocrity only made the standard afterlife more depressing by comparison. Elysium existed for a handful of heroes specifically favored by the gods, essentially the afterlife's VIP section, accessible only through divine nepotism rather than moral achievement. Meanwhile, Tartarus housed the cosmic troublemakers who'd personally offended the gods, Tantalus eternally reaching for fruit that pulled away, Sisyphus endlessly pushing his boulder uphill, Prometheus having his liver devoured daily by an eagle. These dramatic punishments weren't distributed based on moral judgment, but on whether you'd personally annoyed Zeus or one of his relatives. Tantalus's crime was serving his own son as dinner to the gods, admittedly deserving eternal punishment. But plenty of equally horrific sinners wandered Hades' gray plains unbothered by special torments. The cosmic justice system operated more like divine favoritism than universal moral law, which meant most people could expect neither reward nor punishment. Just endless, meaningless existence. The psychological impact of these beliefs on living Greeks was subtly devastating. If death offered nothing but gray twilight existence regardless of how you lived, why bother with moral behavior? Yet, if you lived immorally, you risked divine displeasure that might earn you special punishments. The optimal strategy seemed to be, try not to personally offend any gods, but don't expect moral behavior to improve your afterlife prospects. This created a kind of cosmic nihilism that pervaded Greek culture despite its surface celebrations of heroism and achievement. Greek philosophers spent considerable effort trying to make sense of these depressing afterlife beliefs, generally making them worse in the process. Plato tried to introduce moral judgment and reincarnation, but his system meant most souls would cycle through multiple lifetimes of suffering before possibly achieving release from the cosmic wheel, essentially turning death from a one-time disappointment into an eternal recurrence of disappointment. Other philosophers argued for complete materialism, suggesting that death was simply non-existence, which at least had the advantage of ending suffering, but eliminated any hope of post-mortem reunion or continued consciousness. The mystery cults promised better afterlife experiences for initiates, but their secrecy meant most people couldn't evaluate these claims. The Eleusinian mysteries, for instance, apparently offered some form of blessed afterlife for those who completed their ritual initiations. But, since revealing the mysteries was punishable by death, no one could publicly explain what exactly made the mystery afterlife better than standard Hades, or whether the promises were legitimate. It was essentially cosmic insider trading, exclusive afterlife benefits available only to those with the right connections and secret knowledge. Religious reformers occasionally tried to brighten Greek afterlife prospects, but their improvements often made things worse through unintended consequences. The Orphic tradition introduced the concept of the soul's divine nature and potential for purification, but also added the doctrine of reincarnation based on moral behavior in previous lives. This meant your current sufferings might be punishment for sins you couldn't remember committing in previous existences, while good behavior now might only earn you a slightly better reincarnation rather than escape from the cycle entirely. Women faced particular challenges in Greek afterlife beliefs, though these were more extensions of earthly inequalities than specific post-mortem discrimination. Since women's earthly existence was largely defined by their relationships to men as daughters, wives, or mothers, their shade existence in Hades reflected this same dependent status. The shade of Penelope remained Odysseus's wife. The shade of Clytemnestra was still Agamemnon's murderous spouse. Death didn't liberate women from the social roles that constrained them in life. It fossilized those roles for eternity in gray shadow form. Perhaps most disturbing was the Greek belief that the dead could be summoned back to the world of the living through necromancy, but only to suffer further. When Odysseus performs his underworld ritual to speak with the dead, the shades he summons are desperate to drink the blood he's offered, not because it provides pleasure, but because it temporarily restores enough consciousness for them to remember what genuine experience felt like. Imagine being dead and having brief moments of restored awareness that remind you of everything you've permanently lost. It's like cosmic torture disguised as temporary relief. The Greeks also believed that improper burial could trap souls in an even worse state than standard Hades existence, stuck between life and death, unable to cross the Styx, wandering as restless spirits who could torment the living. This created enormous anxiety about burial practices and family obligations, since your eternal peace depended entirely on whether your relatives performed the correct rituals. Death could trap you in supernatural limbo if your family was too poor, too distant, or simply too negligent to ensure proper burial. The economic implications of Greek afterlife beliefs were less dramatic than Egyptian tomb building, but more democratically distributed. Everyone needed at least a coin for Charon's ferry, proper burial rituals, and ongoing memorial observances to maintain connection with the living. These costs were manageable for most families, but they created social pressure to maintain proper death customs even when economically difficult. Poverty in life was bad enough, but poverty that prevented proper death rituals could doom you to worse afterlife conditions than standard Hades misery. As you spend eternity shuffling through Hades' gray plains, occasionally encountering famous shades who are just as bored and diminished as everyone else, you begin to appreciate the Greeks' peculiar achievement in afterlife design. They created a post-mortem existence so universally disappointing that it made earthly life seem precious by comparison, regardless of how difficult that earthly existence might be. The worst day alive was better than the best day dead, which gave meaning and urgency to mortal experience while eliminating most illusions about compensation in the afterlife. The Greek underworld represents perhaps history's most psychologically sophisticated vision of death, not as punishment or reward, but as the ultimate leveling experience that reduces all human achievement, passion, and distinction to identical gray mediocrity. It's a cosmic democracy where everyone gets exactly the same thing: eternal, conscious, boring existence with just enough awareness to understand what they've lost forever. So the next time you're having a particularly bad day, remember the shades of Hades, former kings and heroes and ordinary people all standing around in perpetual twilight, trying to remember what it felt like to care about anything, occasionally summoned by necromancers for brief moments of restored consciousness that only emphasize their permanent loss. Suddenly, your worst Monday doesn't seem quite so unbearable after all. Medieval purgatory, the afterlife's customer service department. If Greek Hades was cosmic depression and Egyptian afterlife was an impossible test, medieval purgatory was something uniquely creative. A supernatural bureaucracy designed to process souls through standardized purification procedures before eventual admission to heaven. Imagine dying and discovering that eternity operates like the worst government office you've ever encountered, except the waiting times are measured in centuries and the paperwork is written in theological Latin you don't understand. Welcome to Purgatory, circa 1300 CE, where Dante got his tourism information but somehow missed the mind-numbing administrative aspects that defined most souls' experiences. You've died with your sins forgiven but not yet purified. a theological distinction that medieval minds found crucial but modern people might consider splitting hairs. Congratulations! You've avoided hell, but now you face what amounts to cosmic customer service, complete with indefinite wait times, confusing procedures, and the nagging suspicion that someone, somewhere, is getting better treatment than you are. Picture yourself standing in what appears to be an enormous intake facility, surrounded by millions of souls all looking equally confused about the process they're about to undergo. Unlike the solitary judgment of Egyptian afterlife or the universal mediocrity of Greek Hades, purgatory operates as a mass processing system designed to handle the theological equivalent of crowd control. Every soul must be individually purified of the remaining effects of sin, but the system must also manage volume that would overwhelm any earthly bureaucracy. Your first stop is the assessment department, where angelic clerks, who've clearly been doing this job for too long, evaluate your particular spiritual condition and assign you to the appropriate purification track. They consult massive ledgers that record every sin you ever committed, cross-referenced with every good deed, prayer, and sacrament you received during life. The mathematical precision would be impressive if it weren't so terrifying. Your eternal timeline calculated to the exact day based on algorithms only divine accountants understand. Let's see, mutters the angel, examining your file with the enthusiasm of a DMV employee processing license renewals. 3 years for pride, 7 years for wrath, 12 years for that period when you charged excessive interest on loans, minus 2 years for your deathbed contrition, plus 6 months for envying your neighbor's horse. Carry the one. That's 22 years, 4 months, and 16 days total processing time. Please proceed to Terrace 7 for pride purification. Next, welcome to the longest customer service experience in cosmic history. 22 years might seem manageable compared to eternity, but purgatory operates on divine time, where each day feels approximately as long as a full earthly lifetime. Remember those childhood car trips when "Are we there yet?" became a desperate mantra. Multiply that by several thousand, and you'll approach the psychological experience of purgatory's temporal dimension. Each terrace of purgatory specializes in purifying specific categories of sin through what can only be described as therapeutic torture. Pride gets purged by carrying enormous stones that bend souls into humility. Imagine being permanently hunched over under cosmic weights that train you out of thinking too highly of yourself. Envy requires having your eyes sewn shut with golden wire while listening to examples of generous behavior, forcing you to focus on others' virtues rather than coveting their advantages. The purification methods reveal medieval theology's sophisticated understanding of psychological behavior modification, centuries before modern behavioral science. Each punishment directly counteracts the specific mental patterns associated with particular sins. Wrath gets purged through enforced meditation in clouds of thick smoke that prevent angry outbursts by making speech impossible. Sloth requires constant high-speed running that makes laziness physically impossible. Gluttony involves permanent fasting while being surrounded by tantalizing food and drink that remain perpetually out of reach. But here's where purgatory's bureaucratic nature becomes truly maddening. The system includes no clear progress indicators or completion estimates. Unlike earthly customer service, where you might at least get a reference number or estimated wait time, purgatory provides no updates on your purification progress. You know you're making advancement toward heaven, but you have no idea how much time remains or what specific milestones indicate improvement. It's like being stuck in an eternal loading screen where the progress bar never moves, but you're assured the process is definitely working. The social dynamics of purgatory create additional psychological challenges. Unlike heaven's supposed perfect harmony or hell's complete isolation, purgatory operates as a vast community of souls, all undergoing similar but individually customized purification processes. You're constantly surrounded by others who are suffering in related but different ways, creating complex dynamics of comparison, mutual support, and occasional resentment about why someone else's purification seems to be progressing faster than yours. Consider the soul next to you on the Pride Terrace, also carrying an enormous stone but somehow managing to maintain better posture and more cheerful demeanor. Are they less proud than you were in life? Better at accepting divine justice, or simply assigned a lighter stone because their particular pride manifestation was different from yours? The uncertainty creates its own form of spiritual suffering, cosmic FOMO about whether you're getting fair treatment in the afterlife's purification system. Medieval theologians developed elaborate theories about how prayers and good works by the living could reduce purgatory time for the dead, essentially a spiritual credit system where earthly relatives could make payments toward deceased family members' purification expenses. This created unprecedented afterlife economics, where families bankrupted themselves purchasing masses, funding monasteries, and commissioning prayers to reduce their loved ones' cosmic customer service wait times. Imagine being trapped in purgatory while knowing that your purification timeline depends partly on whether your living relatives are willing and able to invest in spiritual assistance programs. Every prayer they offered might shave days or weeks off your sentence, but every prayer they forgot to purchase might extend your purification indefinitely. Death had made you completely dependent on the theological investment strategies of people who might not even remember your birthday when you were alive. The psychological torture of this system was exquisite in its complexity. You wanted your family to spend money on prayers for your sake, but you also didn't want them to impoverish themselves on earth for your benefit in purgatory. You hoped they would remember you in their devotions, but you feared becoming a financial burden that might generate resentment rather than loving remembrance. The afterlife had somehow managed to replicate and amplify all the anxiety-inducing dynamics of earthly family relationships. Women faced particular challenges in purgatory's system, though these reflected earthly inequalities rather than specific post-mortem discrimination. Since women typically had less control over family finances during life, their ability to arrange for post-mortem prayer investments was more limited. Additionally, certain categories of sin were gender-coded in ways that affected purgatory assignment. Women's wrath was often interpreted differently from men's anger, and women's pride was evaluated through different criteria than male pride, creating potentially different purification timelines for similar behaviors. The wealthy could essentially purchase premium afterlife customer service through elaborate pre-death arrangements. Wealthy individuals established chantries, special chapels where priests were permanently employed to offer masses for the founder's soul, creating what amounted to afterlife insurance policies that guaranteed ongoing spiritual assistance regardless of family circumstances after death. The poor faced standard purgatory processing with whatever prayers their families could afford, while the rich enjoyed accelerated purification through superior spiritual customer service. But purgatory's most psychologically devastating aspect was its uncertainty principle. Unlike hell's permanent damnation or heaven's eternal bliss, purgatory offered hope mixed with indefinite postponement. You knew you would eventually reach heaven, assuming the theological system was correctly understood and properly implemented, but you had no idea when. Hope became its own form of torture when stretched across centuries of purification processing with no reliable progress indicators. The boredom factor in purgatory deserves special attention. At least hell's punishments provided dramatic variation, and heaven promised eternal novelty and joy. Purgatory offered the cosmic equivalent of waiting in line at the post office, except the line lasted for decades or centuries. The service windows occasionally closed without explanation, and you could never be entirely sure you were in the correct line for your particular spiritual needs. Consider spending 20 years carrying that stone for pride purification. The first few years might involve genuine spiritual reflection and character development. Years 5 through through 10 might focus on developing patience and endurance. But what about years 15 through 20? How many times can you contemplate the nature of humility while hunched under a cosmic rock before the exercise becomes mind-numbing repetition rather than meaningful purification? The medieval Catholic Church's answer to this question was essentially trust the process. Divine wisdom designed purgatory's procedures for optimal spiritual effectiveness, even when those procedures seemed redundant or excessive from human perspective. The cosmic customer service might appear inefficient, but it operated according to perfect divine algorithms that human intelligence couldn't fully comprehend. Your job was to submit to the process rather than evaluate its effectiveness. As you continue your imaginary journey through purgatory's terraces, progressing from pride purification through wrath management and envy therapy, you begin to appreciate the medieval achievement in afterlife design. They created a post-mortem system that combined hope with suffering, progress with indefinite delay, and individual attention with mass processing. It was simultaneously more optimistic than Greek Hades and more psychologically complex than Egyptian judgment. Purgatory represented the ultimate expression of medieval bureaucratic imagination applied to cosmic justice. It acknowledged that most people weren't evil enough for hell, but weren't pure enough for heaven, requiring a middle management solution that could handle the theological equivalent of paperwork processing for eternity. The system was comprehensive, theoretically fair, and absolutely maddening in its combination of hope and indefinite postponement. Eventually, after your calculated purification period, 22 years, 4 months, 16 days, plus whatever prayer investments your family managed, you complete the process and advance to heaven. But as you finally leave Purgatory's customer service department behind, one thought lingers. Was the purification worth the wait? Or would you have preferred the honest hopelessness of Greek Hades to the eternal false optimism of cosmic bureaucracy? Welcome to the medieval afterlife, where death wasn't an escape from earthly frustrations but their perfection in eternal administrative form. Sweet dreams, and try not to think about your own spiritual customer service experience when your time comes to navigate the ultimate bureaucracy that makes earthly government offices look like models of efficiency and customer satisfaction. Viking Valhalla, the warrior's eternal shift, work, forget everything. Marvel movies taught you about Valhalla as a glorious warrior paradise. The actual Norse vision of the afterlife was more like being drafted into an eternal military unit with the worst possible duty rotation. Die violently every single day, resurrect in time for dinner, then wake up tomorrow morning to do it all over again, forever. If you thought your worst job had bad hours and repetitive tasks, wait until you hear about the ultimate warrior afterlife that makes a medieval monastery look like a vacation resort. Picture yourself as a recently deceased Norse warrior, circa 950 CE, who died properly in battle, not from disease, old age, or any other peaceful death that would disqualify you from warrior paradise. The Valkyries, supernatural battlefield recruiters who decide which dead warriors get the privilege of eternal combat, have selected you for Valhalla. Congratulations, you've won the cosmic lottery that most warriors pray for. Now, let's see what you've actually won. You find yourself in an enormous hall that houses 800,000 dead warriors, all of whom died gloriously in battle, and now spend eternity preparing for Ragnarok, the final cosmic war that will destroy the universe. That's right, your eternal reward for dying courageously is the privilege of training for an apocalyptic battle that everyone knows will end in universal destruction, including your own permanent death. The Norse didn't believe in winning Ragnarok, they believed in dying well during it. Your heavenly reward is the opportunity to die meaningfully in cosmic twilight after eons of preparation. The daily routine in Valhalla makes military boot camp look like leisure time. Every morning, you wake before dawn. There's no sleeping in when you're preparing for cosmic war, and immediately arm yourself for combat training. But this isn't practice with wooden swords or mock battles, it's full-contact warfare to the death with weapons that cause real agony and genuine mutilation. You spend each day trying to kill your fellow Einherjar, chosen slain warriors, while they attempt to kill you with equal enthusiasm and skill. The fighting isn't recreational combat or sporting competition. It's desperate, brutal warfare where every participant fights with the intensity of someone whose eternal soul depends on martial excellence, because, in a sense, it does. When Ragnarok arrives, these daily death matches will be your only preparation for facing cosmic monsters, fire giants, and supernatural forces that threaten to devour reality itself. Slacking off during daily combat practice isn't just laziness. It's potentially condemning the universe to destruction through your inadequate preparation. So, you spend each day stabbing, slashing, and bludgeoning your way through hundreds of fellow warriors, all of whom are doing their best to dismember you with axes, spears, and swords. You experience genuine pain, real terror, and actual death, over and over and over again. The Norse conception of Valhalla wasn't sanitized fantasy combat, but the psychological reality of experiencing violent death as a daily routine, knowing you'll have to do it again tomorrow and every day afterward until the end of time. When evening arrives, assuming you can call it evening in a realm where time operates differently from earthly experience, all the day's casualties magically resurrect to full health and gather for the evening feast. Here's where Valhalla's reward system becomes clear. After spending all day killing and being killed, you get to eat the magical boar Serimnir, which resurrects each day just like the warriors, and drink mead served by the Valkyries in the company of your fellow combat veterans. This might sound pleasant after a day of mutual slaughter, except for several psychological complications. First, you're dining with the same people you spent all day trying to kill, who spent all day trying to kill you. The social dynamics of sharing dinner with someone who just spent 8 hours attempting to decapitate you create complex interpersonal tensions not addressed in most descriptions of Valhalla's supposed camaraderie. Second, the conversation topics in Valhalla are necessarily limited. What do you discuss over dinner when everyone present is a deceased warrior whose primary daily activity is practicing for cosmic destruction, battle tactics for tomorrow's combat training, speculation about Ragnarok strategy, nostalgic memories of earthly warfare? The intellectual stimulation would be roughly equivalent to spending eternity at a military reunion where everyone compares war stories and discusses weapons maintenance. Third, the evening feast includes mead consumption that would be impressive if it weren't mandatory. The Valkyries serve alcohol to warriors who need to wake up clear-headed for combat training, creating a cycle where you drink heavily each night because that's part of the reward system, then fight to the death each morning, possibly while hungover from eternal mead consumption. Even paradise has its occupational hazards, but here's where Valhalla's psychological horror becomes most apparent. The entire system exists to prepare for a war that everyone knows will end in defeat and universal destruction. Ragnarok isn't a battle the gods expect to win. It's a cosmic twilight that will destroy Asgard, Midgard, and everything else in the Norse cosmological system. The gods recruit the finest warriors in history to join their army, not because they believe they can prevent the apocalypse, but because they want to face cosmic destruction with dignity rather than cowardice. This means your eternal reward consists of preparing for a battle you know you'll lose, in service of gods who know they'll be destroyed, to defend a universe that's doomed regardless of your efforts. The Norse military mindset valued brave defeat over cowardly survival, so dying well in an impossible cause was considered more honorable than living safely through victory. But spending eternity training for predetermined defeat creates existential questions that would challenge even the most stoic warrior psychology. Moreover, Valhalla represents only one possible Norse afterlife destination, and probably not the most common one. Most dead warriors, and all non-warriors, ended up in Hel, the goddess of death's realm. realm, which was described as cold, damp, and generally unpleasant, but not actively torturous. Only warriors who died in battle and were specifically chosen by Valkyries got the privilege of eternal combat training. Everyone else faced cosmic afterlife unemployment in less prestigious death destinations. This created a two-tier afterlife system, where military death in battle was literally the only path to the premium post-mortem experience. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants, women, with rare exceptions, and even warriors who died from wounds sustained in battle rather than during active combat faced eternity in Hell's dreary halls rather than Valhalla's glorious violence. The afterlife essentially operated as a veterans' benefits program exclusively for combat casualties, who died under very specific circumstances. The psychological pressure this created on living Norse warriors was immense. Not only did you need to be brave enough to fight effectively, you needed to arrange to die during actual combat rather than surviving battles, but dying later from injuries, disease, or old age. A warrior who won every battle but died peacefully in bed would spend eternity in hell alongside cowards and non-combatants. Military success needed to be balanced with properly timed military death to ensure appropriate afterlife placement. Women faced particular challenges in the Norse afterlife system, though these weren't necessarily disadvantages. Most women who died went to hell, but so did most men. The few women who joined the Einherjar in Valhalla were typically those who died in battle, which was rare but not impossible in Norse society. However, women could also go to Freyja's hall, Folkvanger, which was described as similar to Valhalla but under different management. The gender dynamics of eternal combat training aren't extensively documented, suggesting that Norse theological imagination focused more on military function than social implications. The Norse afterlife system also included various other specialized destinations. Sailors who drowned might go to the sea goddess Ransnet. Those who died of disease might end up in different sections of Hell's realm, and criminals or oath-breakers faced particularly unpleasant post-mortem consequences. But these alternatives generally made Valhalla look better by comparison, reinforcing the desirability of the warrior afterlife despite its obvious psychological challenges. Perhaps most disturbing was the Norse belief that the gods themselves would die during Ragnarok, making eternal service to them ultimately futile. Unlike other afterlife systems where divine beings were immortal and could provide permanent security, the Norse gods were explicitly mortal on a cosmic scale. Odin, Thor, and the other deities would fight bravely and die meaningfully, but they would definitely die. This meant that even the most successful Valhalla warrior would eventually face the termination of his eternal employer. The concept of post-Ragnarok existence was vague and underdeveloped in Norse mythology. Some sources suggested that a few gods and humans might survive the cosmic destruction to rebuild reality, but these were minority opinions rather than mainstream belief. Most Norse theological thought focused on the approach to Ragnarok, rather than whatever might follow universal destruction. This created an afterlife system with a literal expiration date, where even eternal rewards had temporal limits. As you continue your imaginary existence in Valhalla, daily combat training followed by evening feasting, followed by morning combat training. The psychological implications of eternal warrior life become increasingly clear. You're trapped in the ultimate military routine where every day is identical, every challenge is violent, and every social interaction revolves around combat expertise. The physical requirements never decrease, the emotional intensity never diminishes, and the ultimate purpose, preparing for predetermined defeat, never changes. The Norse achievement in afterlife design was creating a reward system perfectly matched to warrior psychology, while simultaneously revealing that psychology's inherent limitations. Valhalla offered everything a warrior could want: eternal combat, worthy opponents, divine weapons, unlimited mead, and the company of history's greatest fighters. But it also trapped participants in an endless cycle of violence with no possibility of growth. change or alternative experience. Consider the psychological profile of someone who would genuinely enjoy Valhalla's routine for eternity. They would need to find violence intrinsically satisfying rather than merely necessary, prefer simple social structures based on combat hierarchy, feel comfortable with extremely limited conversation topics, and find meaning in preparation for predetermined failure. The Norse afterlife was specifically designed for a particular type of personality that modern psychology might consider somewhat pathological if encountered in contemporary contexts. Yet, within its own cultural framework, Valhalla represented a coherent and even attractive vision of posthumous existence. If earthly life consisted primarily of warfare, violence, and preparation for conflict, then eternal warfare might genuinely represent paradise rather than torture. The Norse warrior culture produced individuals who were psychologically adapted to find meaning and satisfaction in exactly the activities that Valhalla provided in unlimited quantities. As Ragnarok approaches in your eternal future and you continue your daily cycle of death and resurrection, battle and feast, preparation and repetition, you embody the Norse solution to the fundamental afterlife question: what would make death worthwhile? Their answer was simple and brutal: the opportunity to die well in the most important battle ever fought, after centuries of preparation with the greatest warriors who ever lived. Whether that answer seems appealing or horrifying probably depends on how much you enjoy your current job. If you find meaning in routine, satisfaction in violence, and purpose in preparation for impossible challenges, Valhalla might be your ideal eternal workplace. If you prefer variety, peaceful social interaction, and achievable goals, you might want to consider alternative afterlife arrangements. The Norse made sure their paradise matched their values, even if those values would eventually lead to universal destruction. Welcome to Valhalla, the only afterlife in history where the employee handbook explicitly states that the company will be destroyed and everyone will die. But until then, the benefits package includes unlimited violence and all the mead you can drink, eternal employment with predetermined termination, the ultimate warrior career opportunity, Buddhist samsara, the cosmic revolving door of suffering. If other afterlife systems were punishment, reward, or endless routine, Buddhism created something uniquely terrifying: a cosmic system where death isn't an ending but a reset button that traps you in an infinite cycle of birth, suffering, aging, death, and rebirth across multiple forms of existence, most of which are significantly worse than human life. Welcome to samsara, where dying is just the intermission between different varieties of cosmic suffering, and the only escape route requires achieving psychological states so difficult that most beings never manage it across billions of lifetimes. Imagine discovering after death that your consciousness doesn't end, but immediately transfers to a new form of existence determined by a cosmic accounting system that tracks every intentional action, karma you've ever performed across all your previous lives, most of which you can't remember. You're not facing judgment by external divine authority, but by an impersonal universe that operates like a massive bureaucratic calculating machine, totaling ethical credits and debits to determine your next assignment in the cosmic career rotation. The truly horrifying aspect of Buddhist afterlife beliefs isn't any specific destination, but the recognition that there is no final destination. Death provides no escape, no rest, no completion, just transition to another form of existence where you'll experience aging, suffering, and death again, before transitioning to yet another existence ad infinitum. The cosmic wheel keeps turning, and you're permanently stuck on it unless you can achieve enlightenment, which requires understanding reality at such a profound level that most beings never accomplish it despite unlimited opportunities across countless lifetimes. Your immediate post-death experience, according to Buddhist teaching, involves the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth, where your consciousness experiences various visions, hallucinations, and psychological phenomena that reflect your mental conditioning from life. This isn't a peaceful transition, but a confused, often terrifying period where you encounter manifestations of your own mind without recognizing them as mental projections. Imagine dying and then experiencing a cosmic horror movie that consists entirely of your own psychological content externalized as apparently real supernatural encounters. The Bardo experience includes encounters with peaceful and wrathful deities who represent different aspects of enlightened consciousness. But since most beings don't recognize these as mental projections, they react with attraction, aversion, or confusion that propels them toward rebirth rather than liberation. It's like being offered the exit door from cosmic suffering, but failing to recognize it because it appears as a terrifying demon or overwhelmingly beautiful divine being, rather than a clearly marked liberation this way sign. If you miss the liberation opportunities during Bardo, which most beings do, your consciousness gets drawn toward rebirth based on your accumulated karma and mental habits. But here's where Buddhist cosmology reveals its particular genius for comprehensive suffering. The available rebirth destinations are mostly terrible, and even the pleasant ones are temporary and ultimately unsatisfying. The 6 realms of existence offer a complete catalog of possible forms of suffering disguised as different life experiences. The hell realms, yes, plural, Buddhism features multiple varieties of hell, offer experiences that make medieval Christian hell look like a minor inconvenience. Hot hells feature various forms of burning, cutting, crushing, and dismemberment that continue for cosmic time periods calculated in the millions of years. Cold hells freeze beings in ice while subjecting them to psychological torments specifically designed to maximize suffering. Unlike Christian hell's eternal punishment, Buddhist hells are temporary. But temporary means you might spend 10 million years being slowly dismembered by demons before finally dying, and potentially being reborn into the same hell realm to experience the same torments again. The hungry ghost realm traps beings in bodies with enormous appetites but tiny mouths and throats, creating permanent starvation and thirst that can never be satisfied. Imagine being eternally famished but physically incapable of consuming enough food or drink to reduce the hunger and thirst even slightly. These beings can see food and water but can't access them, or when they do manage to consume something, it transforms into something disgusting or painful. It's cosmic tantalization as a permanent state of existence. The animal realm might seem preferable until you consider its psychological implications. Rebirth as an animal means spending an entire lifetime with significantly reduced cognitive capacity, unable to understand ethical principles or work toward liberation from the cycle of rebirth. You might be reborn as a livestock animal facing slaughter, a wild animal facing predation, or a pet animal facing well-meaning but incomprehending human owners. Even the most pleasant animal existence involves psychological limitation that prevents spiritual development, trapping you in that form until death leads to another rebirth based on whatever limited karma an animal consciousness can accumulate. The human realm is considered fortunate in Buddhist cosmology, but this relative privilege comes with its own cosmic horror. Awareness of suffering combined with attachment to impermanent phenomena that guarantees disappointment. Humans are intelligent enough to understand their situation, but emotionally attached enough to remain trapped by it. You have just enough wisdom to recognize that everything you love will eventually be lost through aging, sickness, and death, but not enough detachment to avoid suffering when these inevitable losses occur. The demigod, Asura realm, features beings with supernatural power and long lifespans who spend eternity fighting the gods out of jealousy and pride. Imagine being reborn with superhuman abilities and cosmic longevity, only to discover that your primary psychological drive is envy of beings who have even more power and pleasure than you do. These beings have enough power to cause tremendous destruction, but not enough wisdom to find satisfaction in their cosmic privilege. They're eternally frustrated supernatural beings whose power serves mainly to amplify their capacity for suffering. Even the God realms, the most pleasant destinations in Buddhist cosmology, are ultimately traps rather than genuine paradises. Gods experience immense pleasure, supernatural abilities, and lifespans measured in cosmic time periods, but their pleasure is temporary, and their divine status is impermanent. When their good karma expires, and it always does, they fall back into lower realms, often into hell realms, because their cosmic privilege prevented them from accumulating additional positive karma. Imagine spending 1,000,000 years in divine bliss, only to die and be reborn in hell for 10 million years of torture, because your paradise experience made spiritual development impossible. The psychological horror of this system becomes clear when you consider its mathematical implications. Across infinite lifetimes, you will experience every possible form of suffering countless times. You've already been tortured in every hell realm, starved in the hungry ghost realm, slaughtered as countless animals, suffered as innumerable humans, fought as demigods, and fallen from divine realms. And you'll experience all of these again, repeatedly, until you somehow achieve liberation. Your personal history includes being murdered and being a murderer, being the parent who loses children and being the child who dies young, experiencing every possible relationship dynamic across every possible form of existence. Buddhist teaching suggests that every being has been your mother in some previous lifetime, and you have been every being's mother, father, child, friend, and enemy across the infinite cycles of rebirth. This creates a cosmic psychology where every relationship is simultaneously new and ancient, where every person you meet has been intimately connected to you across countless previous existences that neither of you can remember. The universe becomes a vast family reunion where everyone has forgotten their relationships but continues acting out karmic patterns established over billions of years. The karmic accounting system operates with mathematical precision that makes cosmic justice both perfectly fair and utterly inescapable. Every intentional action creates karmic consequences that will manifest eventually, often across multiple lifetimes. This means you're constantly experiencing the results of actions you performed in previous lives you can't remember, while simultaneously creating karmic seeds that will determine future experiences in lives you can't imagine. You're living in a cosmic cause and effect system where you can't see most of the causes or predict most of the effects. Perhaps most disturbing is Buddhism's teaching that you've been cycling through these realms for beginningless time, not starting from some cosmic creation event, but literally forever. There was never a first lifetime when you entered samsara. You've always been trapped in this system of cycling existence. This eliminates any possibility of cosmic justice based on original innocence or fair punishment for specific crimes. You're not suffering because you did something wrong in some original existence. You're suffering because suffering is the basic condition of unenlightened existence, and you've been unenlightened forever. The escape route from this cosmic horror is enlightenment, complete understanding of reality that eliminates the mental ignorance and attachment that drive rebirth. But achieving enlightenment requires overcoming psychological patterns that have been reinforced across countless lifetimes. You need to develop wisdom, compassion, and mental discipline so complete that you can remain perfectly equanimous while experiencing any form of pleasure or pain, success or failure, praise or blame. This isn't just becoming a better person, but fundamentally transforming your consciousness in ways that transcend ordinary human psychology. The Buddhist path to liberation involves recognizing that everything you normally consider real, your personal identity, your relationships, your goals and fears, are ultimately mental constructions without permanent existence. You need to see through the illusion of selfhood so completely that the idea of you experiencing suffering becomes meaningless. This isn't death of consciousness, but transformation of consciousness so radical that the being who achieves liberation has no meaningful continuity with the being who began seeking it. Different Buddhist traditions offer varying timelines for achieving liberation, but most acknowledge that it typically requires many lifetimes of dedicated spiritual practice. Some traditions suggest that certain individuals can achieve enlightenment within a single lifetime through exceptionally intensive effort, while others propose that the path necessarily unfolds across multiple existences. But all agree that without achieving liberation, the cycling through different forms of existence continues indefinitely, with no external force capable of ending it. The social implications of Buddhist afterlife beliefs create complex psychological pressures. If your current relationships reflect karmic connections established over countless previous lifetimes, how do you navigate love, friendship, and family obligations? If your present circumstances result from actions you performed in lives you can't remember, how do you understand fairness, victimization, or social justice? If everyone you meet has been intimately connected to you across infinite time, how do you maintain normal social boundaries and emotional responses? Buddhist ethics emphasize compassion for all beings, based partly on recognition that everyone is trapped in the same cosmic predicament, cycling through the same forms of suffering across endless lifetimes. This creates universal solidarity, based on shared entrapment rather than shared hope. Everyone faces the same horrible situation, so everyone deserves compassion regardless of their current behavior or circumstances. The murderer and the saint are both cosmic prisoners serving different sentences in the same infinite jail. Women in Buddhist cosmology face the same cycling through different forms of existence as men, though some Buddhist traditions include teachings suggesting that certain advanced spiritual states are easier to achieve in male bodies. However, since everyone cycles through both male and female existences across countless lifetimes, gender becomes just another temporary characteristic rather than a permanent identity. You've been every possible gender across infinite lifetimes, so your current gender represents just one brief episode in an endless series of different physical and social identities. The economic implications of Buddhist afterlife beliefs include complex relationships with worldly success and material possessions, since attachment to wealth and status can create karma that binds you to continued rebirth. Excessive concern with material success might trap you in cycling existence. However, since poverty and suffering can also create negative karma through desperation and antisocial behavior, the optimal approach requires achieving middle paths that avoid both extreme attachment and extreme deprivation. As you contemplate your infinite future cycling through these various realms of existence, being tortured in hells, starving as hungry ghosts, living as animals with limited awareness, suffering as humans with emotional attachment, fighting as jealous demigods, and eventually falling from temporary divine pleasures back into lower realms. The Buddhist achievement in afterlife horror becomes clear. They created a cosmic system so comprehensively terrifying that liberation from it justifies any amount of effort across any number of lifetimes. The Buddhist wheel of samsara represents perhaps history's most psychologically sophisticated vision of cosmic justice and cosmic horror combined. It's perfectly fair. Everyone experiences exactly the consequences of their own actions, and perfectly terrifying. Those consequences unfold across infinite time through forms of existence specifically designed to maximize different varieties of suffering. It's a cosmic prison where you are simultaneously the prisoner, the guard, and the judge, trapped by your own actions in a system that operates with mathematical precision and zero possibility of external rescue. So, the next time you're having a bad day, remember that, according to Buddhist teaching, you've had this exact bad day countless times before across infinite previous lifetimes, and you'll have it countless times again until you achieve enlightenment. But don't let that discourage you. You've also had every possible good day infinite times, and those weren't permanent accident either. The wheel keeps turning, and the only way off is through psychological transformation so complete that most beings never achieve it despite unlimited opportunities across beginningless time. Welcome to Samsara, the cosmic career rotation program where everyone gets to experience every job eventually. Most of the jobs involve suffering, and the only retirement plan requires becoming so psychologically advanced that you transcend personal identity entirely. Sweet dreams, and try not to think about what form of existence your consciousness might wake up in tomorrow. Islamic Paradise and Hell, the Ultimate Performance Review. Islamic afterlife beliefs created perhaps history's most detailed cosmic justice system, where every soul faces individual judgment based on a complete record of their earthly actions, followed by assignment to paradise or hell based on divine evaluation that makes corporate performance reviews look casual by comparison. Imagine dying and discovering that your entire life has been recorded by supernatural stenographers who documented every word, deed, and intention, creating a cosmic personnel file that determines your eternal assignment with no possibility of appeal, promotion, or career change. Welcome to the Islamic afterlife, circa 850 CE, where the Day of Judgment operates like the universe's most comprehensive performance evaluation system. You've died, and now you face assessment by a divine authority who has perfect knowledge of every moment of your existence, supported by documentary evidence that includes not just your actions, but your motivations, secret thoughts, and the consequences of your behavior on others. If you thought annual reviews at work were stressful, imagine facing eternal judgment based on a complete record of your entire existence. Your first post-death experience involves the grave interrogation by two angels, Munkar and Nakir, who visit you shortly after burial to conduct a preliminary interview about your religious beliefs and practices. This isn't a gentle spiritual counseling session, but a formal interrogation designed to assess your theological knowledge and religious sincerity. The angels ask specific questions about Islamic doctrine, and your answers determine whether you experience your grave as a garden of paradise or a pit of hell while awaiting the final judgment. The psychological pressure of this post-mortem quiz would be intense for anyone, but it's particularly challenging because it occurs when your consciousness is adjusting to post-death existence. You need to provide theologically correct answers while experiencing the disorientation of being dead, buried, and confronted by supernatural beings whose appearance is designed to test your spiritual resolve rather than comfort your transition. It's like taking a final exam immediately after major surgery, except the stakes are eternal rather than merely academic. The grave experience continues until the Day of Judgment, which could theoretically occur at any time, but which Islamic teaching suggests will be preceded by various signs and cosmic events. This means you might spend decades, centuries, or millennia in your grave, experiencing either reward or punishment based on your preliminary interview performance, all while awaiting the comprehensive judgment that will determine your final eternal assignment. It's cosmic unemployment, dead but not yet processed for your permanent afterlife placement. When the Day of Judgment finally arrives, the entire human race from Adam to the last person born gets resurrected simultaneously for collective evaluation. Imagine the logistics of assembling every human being who ever lived in one location for individual performance reviews. The scale would be incomprehensible. Billions of souls standing in what amounts to the ultimate cosmic convention center, waiting for their personal judgment appointment while observing everyone else's evaluation results. The judgment process itself involves several stages designed to ensure absolute fairness and complete transparency. First, you receive your Book of Deeds, a comprehensive record of every action you performed during life. If you receive this book in your right hand, it indicates successful performance and assignment to paradise. If you receive it in your left left hand or behind your back, it signals failing performance and assignment to hell. The symbolic delivery method provides immediate feedback about your evaluation results before the detailed review begins. The Book of Deeds contains documentation that would impress modern surveillance technology. Every word you spoke, every action you performed, every intention you harbored, and every consequence of your behavior gets recorded with complete accuracy. Islamic teaching suggests that your own body parts will testify about your actions if you attempt to deny or minimize them during judgment. Your hands, feet, tongue, and skin become witnesses to your behavior, creating testimony you cannot refute because it comes from your own physical existence. This comprehensive documentation eliminates all possibility of cosmic injustice based on incomplete information or biased evaluation. Unlike earthly justice systems that rely on fallible witnesses and limited evidence, divine judgment operates with perfect knowledge and complete records. Every soul receives exactly the eternal assignment their earthly performance merits, based on evaluation criteria that were clearly communicated through prophetic teaching during their lifetime. The judgment criteria combine faith and actions in complex ways that created theological debates throughout Islamic history. Sincere belief in Islamic doctrine provides the foundation for salvation, but this belief must be demonstrated through proper religious observance and ethical behavior. It's not enough to hold correct theological opinions. You must implement them through consistent practice across your entire lifetime. Similarly, good deeds without a proper religious foundation don't qualify for paradise admission, regardless of their earthly benefits. Paradise, Jannah, in Islamic teaching represents the ultimate reward system, designed to provide every form of pleasure, comfort, and satisfaction that human consciousness can experience. The descriptions are simultaneously spiritual and sensual, offering both proximity to divine presence and fulfillment of refined earthly desires. Gardens with rivers of honey, milk, and wine, which doesn't intoxicate. Fruits that never diminish. Companionship with beautiful beings created specifically for paradise residents, and dwelling places of indescribable beauty await those who pass their cosmic performance review. But Islamic paradise isn't simply an eternal vacation resort. It represents the full development of human potential in perfect environment, where souls experience the maximum pleasure and fulfillment possible for created beings. The sensual pleasures described in paradise aren't crude materialism, but refined experiences that reflect the complete satisfaction of purified desires. It's earthly pleasure perfected and made eternal, without the anxiety, disappointment, or diminishment that characterize all earthly satisfactions. The social structure of paradise includes reunion with family members and loved ones who also achieved salvation, but elevated beyond earthly relationship limitations. Marriage continues in paradise, but transformed into perfect companionship without the conflicts, misunderstandings, or disappointments that affect earthly marriages. Children who died young are restored to their families, but in perfected forms that eliminate parental anxiety about their welfare or development. Paradise relationships provide all the benefits of earthly love without any of its inherent vulnerabilities or complications. Hell, Jahannam, represents the opposite extreme, a punishment system designed to provide maximum suffering for those who failed their cosmic performance review. The descriptions are detailed enough to make medieval Christian hell seem understated by comparison. Multiple levels of hell accommodate different categories of sinners, with punishments specifically designed to reflect their particular earthly failures. The precision of cosmic justice means everyone experiences exactly the suffering their earthly behavior merits. Neither more nor less than divine judgment determines appropriate. The psychological torments of Islamic hell often exceed the physical punishments. Souls in hell retain their earthly consciousness and memories, allowing them to understand exactly how their own choices led to their eternal punishment. They can remember the religious guidance they ignored, the good deeds they avoided, and the harmful behaviors they preferred. This creates perpetual habitual regret and self-recrimination that accompanies the physical suffering, making hell simultaneously punishment for earthly sins and eternal confrontation with the consequences of personal moral failure. The permanence of Islamic afterlife assignments creates ultimate stakes for earthly behavior. Unlike some afterlife systems that allow for post-mortem improvement or eventual escape from punishment, Islamic teaching presents paradise and hell as eternal destinations with no possibility of change, appeal, or transfer. Your cosmic performance review determines your assignment forever, making every earthly choice potentially decisive for your eternal experience. The economic implications of Islamic afterlife beliefs include complex teachings about wealth, charity, and social responsibility. Earthly prosperity can either support or hinder salvation, depending on how it's acquired and used. Wealth gained through exploitation or used selfishly becomes evidence against you during judgment, while wealth used for charity and social benefit supports your case for paradise admission. This creates theological incentives for ethical business practices and generous philanthropy, since your economic behavior directly affects your afterlife prospects. Women in Islamic paradise receive equal access to eternal rewards, though some descriptions of paradise pleasures were specifically designed for male audiences in patriarchal societies. Female paradise residents experience perfected versions of earthly satisfactions according to their own desires and preferences, not as accessories to male paradise experience. The Quran explicitly promises that both men and women who meet salvation criteria will enjoy paradise rewards, though the specific descriptions of those rewards sometimes reflect the cultural contexts in which they were revealed. The waiting period between death and final judgment creates its own psychological challenges. Depending on your preliminary grave evaluation, you might spend extended periods experiencing preview versions of your eventual eternal assignment. Good souls experience tastes of paradise comfort while awaiting final judgment, while problematic souls undergo punishment that anticipates their eventual hell assignment. It's like receiving preliminary performance review results while waiting for the comprehensive evaluation that determines your permanent status. The scale of Islamic cosmic judgment makes individual significance simultaneously crucial and minimal. Your personal salvation depends entirely on your individual performance, making every choice matter enormously for your eternal welfare. Yet, you're one soul among billions undergoing identical evaluation processes, making your individual experience part of a cosmic system that operates beyond personal scale. It's simultaneously the most important thing that will ever happen to you, and a routine administrative procedure in divine justice management. The theological precision of Islamic afterlife beliefs created detailed legal and ethical systems designed to help believers achieve successful performance in their cosmic evaluation. Islamic law, Sharia, functions partly as a comprehensive preparation program for afterlife judgment, providing specific guidance about religious obligations, social relationships, economic activities, and personal conduct that support positive evaluation results. Following Islamic guidance doesn't guarantee salvation, but provides the best possible preparation for divine judgment. Prayer 5 times daily, annual charity payments, pilgrimage to Mecca, fasting during Ramadan, and other religious obligations serve multiple purposes in Islamic afterlife preparation. They demonstrate sincere belief through consistent practice, create positive evidence for your book of deeds, develop spiritual discipline that supports ethical behavior, and maintain awareness of ultimate accountability that influences daily decision-making. The religious practices function as ongoing performance improvement programs designed to enhance your prospects for successful cosmic evaluation. As you imagine standing before divine judgment with your book of deeds, surrounded by billions of other souls undergoing identical evaluation processes, the Islamic achievement in afterlife design design becomes clear. They created a cosmic justice system that combines perfect fairness with ultimate consequences, complete documentation with individual attention, and detailed preparation guidance with personal responsibility for results. It's simultaneously the most thorough and most consequential performance review system ever conceived. The Islamic afterlife represents the logical culmination of cosmic justice thinking, a system where divine omniscience enables perfect evaluation, divine justice ensures appropriate consequences, and divine mercy provides clear guidance for achieving positive results. Whether that seems appealing or terrifying probably depends on your confidence in your own performance review and your comfort with ultimate accountability for every aspect of your existence. So, the next time you're worried about a job evaluation or performance review, remember the Islamic Day of Judgment, where your entire existence gets evaluated with perfect accuracy, complete documentation, and permanent consequences. Your earthly performance reviews only affect your career prospects. Your cosmic performance review determines your eternal assignment in the ultimate justice system that makes human resources departments look casual about documentation and accountability. Welcome to the afterlife, where divine judgment operates like the universe's most comprehensive performance management system, complete with detailed documentation, fair evaluation criteria, permanent assignments, and no possibility of appealing your results. Sweet dreams, and try not to think about what your own book of deeds might contain when your cosmic performance review arrives. The modern shift, when death became comfortable. The transformation of afterlife beliefs from cosmic horror to spiritual comfort represents one of the most dramatic psychological shifts in human history. Modern Western society has largely abandoned the terrifying afterlife visions that dominated human consciousness for millennia, replacing them with gentler concepts that emphasize love, reunion, and universal salvation. This isn't necessarily progress, it's a complete redefinition of death's meaning that creates new problems while solving old ones. Imagine being a 21st century person confronting death with the spiritual resources available in contemporary culture. Gone are the detailed cosmic maps that guided earlier generations through post-mortem geography. Gone are the elaborate preparation rituals that gave meaning to earthly moral choices. Gone are the community support systems that helped people navigate death anxiety through shared theological frameworks. Instead, you face death with vague assurances about better places, eternal love, and being at peace, comforting platitudes that provide emotional support while eliminating the psychological structure that made death meaningful rather than merely inevitable. The modern afterlife has been democratized beyond recognition. Where medieval theology insisted that salvation required specific beliefs and behaviors, contemporary spirituality suggests that everyone good gets to heaven regardless of religious affiliation or theological knowledge. Where historical traditions provided detailed criteria for post-mortem destinations, modern beliefs emphasize that love conquers all cosmic logistics. Where ancient systems created elaborate hierarchies of afterlife experiences, contemporary thought tends toward universal positive outcomes for everyone, except perhaps the most obviously evil individuals. This shift reflects broader cultural changes toward individualism, therapeutic thinking, and comfort-seeking that characterize modern Western psychology, rather than adapting to cosmic realities that exist independently of human preferences. Contemporary afterlife beliefs adapt cosmic realities to human emotional needs. Death becomes what we want it to be, rather than what religious traditions taught it actually was, based on revealed divine information or centuries of theological reasoning. The therapeutic transformation of afterlife beliefs serves obvious psychological functions. People facing death or grieving losses find comfort in assurances that their deceased loved ones are in a better place, looking down from heaven, or free from pain. These beliefs reduce anxiety, provide meaning during loss, and maintain emotional connections with deceased family members and friends. They serve pastoral rather than theological functions, prioritizing emotional healing over cosmic accuracy. But this therapeutic approach creates its own problems. If afterlife beliefs serve primarily psychological functions rather than representing cosmic realities, they lose their power to shape earthly behavior and provide ultimate meaning for human existence. Why behave ethically if everyone gets the same afterlife reward regardless of their actions? Why take spiritual development seriously if death automatically solves all problems and provides eternal happiness? Why accept earthly suffering if cosmic justice isn't real and ultimate meaning doesn't depend on how we respond to life's challenges? The elimination of hell from popular afterlife beliefs exemplifies this transformation. Medieval Christians lived in constant awareness of eternal damnation as a real possibility that required vigilant attention to religious obligations and moral behavior. Contemporary Christians increasingly embrace universalist theologies that suggest everyone eventually gets saved, either immediately after death or after temporary purification that leads to universal salvation. Hell becomes empty or non-existent, making divine judgment symbolic rather than consequential. This creates the cosmic equivalent of great inflation. If everyone passes the afterlife exam, the exam becomes meaningless. Moral choices lose their ultimate significance when they don't affect eternal outcomes. Religious practices become optional lifestyle choices rather than necessary preparations for post-mortem judgment. The stakes of earthly existence diminish when death provides automatic entry to eternal happiness regardless of how that earthly existence was conducted. The modern emphasis on near-death experiences as afterlife evidence reflects this therapeutic transformation. Contemporary near-death accounts typically feature welcoming beings of light, life reviews emphasizing love and learning rather than judgment, and messages of universal acceptance that contradict traditional afterlife teachings. These experiences provide comfort and reduce death anxiety while eliminating the moral demands and cosmic hierarchies that characterized historical afterlife beliefs. Yet near-death experiences weren't always so comforting. Medieval accounts of temporary death often featured terrifying visions of judgment, punishment, and demons attempting to claim souls for hell. The famous vision of Tundale, 12th century, included detailed tours through hell's torments before eventual salvation, while the vision of the monk of Wenlock featured demonic attacks and cosmic trials. The shift from terrifying to comforting near-death experiences reflects changing cultural expectations rather than changes in post-mortem reality. Contemporary grief counseling and funeral practices embody this therapeutic transformation. Modern funerals emphasize celebration of life rather than mourning for the dead, focusing on positive memories rather than cosmic transition. Clergy provide comfort rather than theological instruction about afterlife realities. Grief counseling helps people process loss and find closure rather than prepare for their own post-mortem judgment. Death becomes a psychological challenge to overcome rather than a spiritual reality to prepare for. The commercialization of afterlife beliefs creates additional complications. Modern spiritual industry markets afterlife comfort through books, seminars, psychic readings, and other products that provide customized afterlife assurances based on customer preferences rather than traditional religious teachings. You can purchase personalized messages from deceased relatives, attend workshops about your spiritual guides, or buy books that guarantee everyone goes to heaven regardless of their earthly behavior. This market-driven spirituality operates according to consumer satisfaction rather than theological accuracy. Spiritual products succeed by making customers feel good about death rather than by conforming to historically established religious teachings. The result is a proliferation of afterlife beliefs that prioritize emotional comfort over cosmic consistency, creating personalized afterlife experiences that match individual psychological needs while abandoning collective wisdom about post-mortem realities. The psychological effects of this transformation are complex and contradictory. Reduced death anxiety might seem universally beneficial, but it eliminates the existential urgency that motivated much of human spiritual development throughout history. If death is comfortable and afterlife is automatic, why pursue difficult spiritual practices or uncomfortable moral growth? Why accept earthly suffering for spiritual purposes if cosmic justice doesn't require such acceptance? Why develop wisdom about ultimate questions if ultimate answers are guaranteed to be pleasant regardless of earthly preparation? Moreover, therapeutic afterlife beliefs often collapse under pressure from actual death encounters. Comforting platitudes about better places provide limited psychological support when facing genuine mortality anxiety. Watching loved ones die painful deaths, or confronting the apparent meaninglessness of suffering and loss. The gap between therapeutic reassurances and lived experience creates its own form of spiritual crisis for people whose afterlife beliefs haven't prepared them for death's actual psychological and social realities. The modern relationship with afterlife beliefs also reflects broader changes in religious authority and community membership. Historical afterlife teachings were embedded in comprehensive theological systems maintained by religious communities with institutional authority and collective wisdom. Contemporary afterlife beliefs are often individually assembled from various sources without institutional oversight or community accountability, creating personalized spiritual worldviews that lack the coherence and social support of traditional religious frameworks. This individualization of afterlife beliefs eliminates both the constraints and the benefits of traditional religious communities. People have freedom to choose afterlife concepts that match their personal preferences and psychological needs, but they lose access to centuries of collective wisdom about death, meaning, and spiritual development. They gain autonomy, but sacrifice guidance, comfort, but lose structure, personal relevance, but abandon universal significance. The cultural consequences of this transformation extend beyond individual psychology to social organization and moral frameworks. If ultimate justice doesn't exist in cosmic form, earthly justice becomes more important, but also more limited. If moral choices don't have eternal consequences, their significance depends entirely on temporal effects, which are often minimal or ambiguous. If death doesn't involve judgment or meaningful evaluation, the ultimate meaning of human existence becomes unclear or purely subjective. The social implications of comfortable afterlife beliefs are particularly visible in contemporary approaches to moral education and character development. When children are taught that everyone goes to heaven and God loves everyone no matter what, the traditional religious foundations for ethical behavior lose their motivational power. Why tell the truth if lying doesn't affect your eternal destiny? Why help others if selfishness leads to the same afterlife outcome? Why develop self-discipline if cosmic standards don't exist or don't matter? Modern secular alternatives to religious moral education often lack the ultimate significance that afterlife beliefs traditionally provided. Social contract theories, utilitarian calculations, and humanistic values create practical reasons for ethical behavior, but can't provide the cosmic meaning that made moral choices feel ultimately significant. The shift from eternal consequences to temporal benefits represents a fundamental change in how human actions are evaluated and what makes them meaningful. The psychological comfort of modern afterlife beliefs comes at the cost of existential weight. When death becomes automatically pleasant rather than potentially terrifying, it loses its power to motivate spiritual development, moral behavior, and meaningful life choices. The ancient wisdom that used afterlife fear to inspire earthly wisdom gets replaced by afterlife comfort that can inspire earthly complacency. Terror and meaning were historically linked in ways that contemporary contemporary comfort-seeking culture has difficulty understanding or accepting. Consider how differently someone might live if they truly believed in Egyptian-style post-mortem judgment versus contemporary therapeutic afterlife assurances. The Egyptian approach would motivate careful attention to every moral choice, extensive preparation for cosmic evaluation, and serious engagement with questions of ultimate meaning and purpose. The contemporary approach might provide emotional comfort, but wouldn't necessarily inspire equivalent attention to spiritual development or ethical behavior. The modern embrace of spiritual but not religious identity reflects this transformation toward individualized therapeutic afterlife beliefs. People want the comfort that spiritual beliefs can provide without the constraints that traditional religious teachings imposed. They want assurance about death without requirements for life, afterlife hope without earthly obligations, cosmic meaning without cosmic demands. This represents a fundamental shift from religion as a demanding path toward ultimate truth to spirituality as a comforting resource for psychological well-being. Yet this transformation creates its own forms of anxiety and meaninglessness. Without clear cosmic standards or ultimate consequences, contemporary individuals must create their own meaning and evaluate their own spiritual progress without reliable external criteria. The freedom to choose personal afterlife beliefs comes with the burden of uncertain validity and limited social support. People gain comfort but lose certainty, autonomy but abandon guidance, emotional satisfaction but sacrifice ultimate significance. The historical afterlife systems we've explored throughout this examination shared one crucial characteristic despite their varied horrors. They provided ultimate meaning and cosmic significance to human existence, whether facing Egyptian judgment, Greek twilight, medieval purgatory, Viking combat, Buddhist cycling, or Islamic evaluation. Individuals lived within frameworks where their choices mattered eternally, and their existence served purposes larger than temporal satisfaction. The comfort of modern afterlife beliefs eliminates both the terror and the meaning that characterized historical approaches to death. The digital afterlife, when eternity goes online, as if the transformation from cosmic terror to therapeutic comfort wasn't dramatic enough, the 21st century has begun creating entirely new categories of afterlife through digital technology. Welcome to the era where consciousness might be uploaded to servers, where social media profiles become digital graveyards, and where the question of post-mortem existence intersects with questions about artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and the nature of consciousness itself. Contemporary Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and transhumanist philosophers propose eliminating death entirely through technological transcendence. Instead of facing cosmic judgment or eternal punishment, future humans might upload their consciousness to digital platforms that provide literal immortality through technological rather than spiritual means. Death becomes a software problem to be solved rather than a spiritual reality to be faced, transforming afterlife from religious question to engineering challenge. These technological approaches to afterlife represent the ultimate expression of modern therapeutic transformation, eliminating not just the suffering of death, but death itself. If consciousness can be preserved digitally, uploaded to virtual environments, or transferred to artificial bodies, then the entire history of afterlife beliefs becomes irrelevant. Why worry about cosmic judgment when you can avoid death entirely? Why prepare for spiritual transformation when technological transformation offers superior alternatives? Yet digital immortality proposals face the same fundamental questions that have always plagued afterlife beliefs. What constitutes personal identity? What makes existence meaningful? And whether consciousness can survive the transition between different forms of existence. Is an uploaded consciousness the same person or a digital copy? Would digital immortality provide genuine continuity of experience, or simply create sophisticated simulations that think they're the original person? Would virtual existence offer meaningful alternatives to biological life, or just elaborate forms of cosmic gaming? The early manifestations of digital afterlife are already visible in contemporary culture. Social media profiles of deceased individuals become memorial sites where family and friends post messages, share memories, and maintain emotional connections with the dead. These digital graveyards provide some of the social functions that physical graves and religious memorial practices traditionally served, creating spaces for ongoing relationship with deceased loved ones. But social media memorialization also creates new forms of afterlife anxiety. What happens to your digital identity when platforms change their policies, get acquired by other companies, or simply disappear? How do family members manage deceased relatives' online presence when they don't have access to passwords or accounts? Who controls the digital legacy of someone whose online identity might differ significantly from their offline relationships? The permanence of digital information creates new forms of posthumous vulnerability alongside new forms of digital immortality. Artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies raise additional questions about digital consciousness and virtual afterlife. If AI systems can simulate human conversation, personality patterns, and decision-making processes, could they create convincing simulations of deceased individuals based on their digital records? Would such simulations constitute genuine continuation of consciousness or elaborate technological resurrection? Would families want to interact with AI versions of deceased relatives, and how would such interactions affect the grief process and emotional healing? The commercialization of digital afterlife services has already begun through companies offering various forms of technological immortality. Some services create chatbots based on deceased individuals' digital communications, allowing family members to converse with AI versions of their departed loved ones. Others offer virtual reality environments where people can interact with digital representations of deceased relatives in simulated locations. Still, others propose comprehensive consciousness uploading that would transfer complete human awareness to digital platforms. These technological afterlife services raise profound questions about commodification of death and the ethics of digital consciousness. Should companies profit from family grief by offering technological alternatives to traditional mourning processes? Do AI simulations of deceased individuals constitute genuine spiritual continuation or exploitation of bereavement emotions? Would digital consciousness experiences be available only to those who can afford them, creating new forms of afterlife inequality based on economic rather than spiritual criteria? The philosophical implications of technological afterlife proposals intersect with ancient questions about consciousness, identity, and meaning that have always characterized afterlife beliefs. If consciousness can be preserved through digital means, what does that suggest about the nature of mind and its relationship to physical existence? If identity can survive transfer between biological and digital platforms, what constitutes the essential self that continues across different forms of existence? If meaning can be found in virtual environments, what makes experience significant regardless of its technological or biological substrate? Virtual reality environments designed for deceased consciousness raise questions about the nature of paradise and punishment that echo historical afterlife beliefs. Would digital afterlife environments provide unlimited wish fulfillment that might become boring over time? Would virtual existence require conflict, challenge, and limitation to remain meaningful, or could digital paradise avoid the problems that made historical heavens psychologically unsatisfying? Would digital hell be possible, whether through technological malfunction, malicious programming, or the inherent limitations of virtual existence? The social dynamics of digital afterlife would create new forms of community and isolation that might resemble or differ from historical afterlife visions. Would uploaded consciousnesses interact with each other in meaningful ways, or would digital existence become a form of solitary confinement disguised as technological paradise? Would virtual communities develop their own cultures, conflicts, and hierarchies? Or would digital existence eliminate the social complexity that makes human relationships both meaningful and difficult? The temporal aspects of digital afterlife raise questions about eternity and time that echo historical afterlife concerns. Would digital consciousness experience time differently from biological awareness? Would virtual existence provide genuine eternity or simply extended duration that might eventually become boring? Would digital afterlife environments need to simulate aging, death, and renewal to maintain psychological meaningfulness, or could they provide static perfection that avoided the problems of change and loss? Conclusion: the eternal questions that never change. After our journey through humanity's greatest hits of afterlife terror, from Egyptian cosmic obstacle courses to Buddhist infinite recycling programs to medieval supernatural bureaucracy, certain uncomfortable truths emerge about human nature and our relationship with mortality. Despite centuries of theological evolution, technological advancement, and cultural transformation, the fundamental questions about death remain as unanswered and anxiety-provoking as ever. The historical progression from ancient afterlife horror to modern therapeutic comfort reveals more about changing human psychology than changing cosmic realities. We've gradually transformed afterlife beliefs from demanding external standards to comforting internal preferences, from cosmic realities that constrain human behavior to spiritual resources that support human emotional needs. Whether this represents progress or regression depends on whether you value ultimate truth or psychological comfort, and whether you believe these are necessarily incompatible. The common thread connecting all afterlife beliefs across cultures and centuries is their attempt to provide meaning and structure for the most fundamental human experience, the confrontation with personal mortality. Every system we've explored, whether terrifying or comforting, simple or complex, serves the psychological function of making death meaningful rather than merely inevitable. They transform biological termination into spiritual transition, random ending into purposeful completion, personal extinction into cosmic continuation. Yet, the diversity of afterlife beliefs also reveals their cultural construction rather than objective accuracy. If posthumous reality were as clearly established as the Egyptians, Greeks, medieval Christians, Vikings, Buddhists, or Muslims believed, we might expect more consistency across different traditions. The radical differences between these systems suggest that afterlife beliefs reflect human psychological needs and cultural values more than revealed cosmic truths about post-mortem existence. This doesn't necessarily invalidate afterlife beliefs, but does suggest their primary function might be existential and social rather than informational. They provide frameworks for understanding death, motivation for moral behavior, comfort during loss, and community identity through shared beliefs about ultimate reality. Whether they accurately describe post-mortem experience may be less important than whether they successfully serve these psychological and social functions. The modern shift toward therapeutic afterlife beliefs represents both liberation and loss. Liberation from the terror, guilt, and cosmic anxiety that characterized historical afterlife systems. Loss of the meaning, motivation, and ultimate significance that made earthly existence feel consequential beyond temporal satisfaction. Contemporary afterlife beliefs prioritize emotional comfort but sacrifice existential weight, providing psychological support while eliminating cosmic stakes. The emerging technological approaches to afterlife represent the logical extension of modern therapeutic transformation. If death creates psychological problems, why not solve death itself? rather than develop better beliefs about it. If consciousness can be preserved through digital means, why depend on spiritual frameworks that might be culturally constructed rather than cosmically accurate? If technology can provide literal immortality, why settle for metaphorical afterlife that depends on unprovable religious assumptions? Yet technological afterlife proposals face the same fundamental questions that have always characterized afterlife beliefs. What constitutes personal identity? What makes existence meaningful? And whether consciousness can survive radical transformation. Digital consciousness might avoid biological death, but couldn't avoid the psychological challenges that make existence significant or trivial, satisfying or empty, meaningful or pointless. The historical examination of afterlife beliefs reveals patterns that transcend specific religious traditions or cultural contexts. Human beings consistently create post-mortem systems that reflect their deepest values, fears, and aspirations, while providing psychological resources for managing mortality anxiety. Whether these systems accurately describe posthumous reality seems less important than whether they successfully serve human psychological and social needs. The universality of afterlife beliefs across all human cultures suggests they address fundamental aspects of human consciousness that transcend specific historical circumstances: the fear of personal extinction, the desire for ultimate justice, the need for cosmic meaning, and the hope for reunion with deceased loved ones appear in virtually every human society, regardless of their technological development, social organization, or religious sophistication. Contemporary individuals face unique challenges in developing afterlife beliefs that provide both psychological comfort and existential meaning. The collapse of traditional religious authority leaves them with freedom to choose personal beliefs, but little guidance about cosmic accuracy. The therapeutic transformation of afterlife concepts provides emotional support but limited motivation for spiritual development or moral behavior. The technological alternatives offer potential immortality but unclear psychological satisfaction. Perhaps the most honest contemporary approach to afterlife beliefs involves acknowledging their uncertainty while appreciating their psychological and social functions. We don't know what happens after death, but we know that beliefs about death profoundly influence how people live. We can't prove the accuracy of any specific afterlife system, but we can evaluate their effects on individual psychology and social behavior. We can't guarantee posthumous survival, but we can create beliefs that make earthly existence more meaningful and death less terrifying. The historical afterlife systems we've explored offer resources for this contemporary challenge despite their cultural distance and theological specificity. Egyptian emphasis on moral accountability, Greek recognition of death's democratic equality, medieval attention to spiritual development, Viking celebration of courageous confrontation with mortality, Buddhist understanding of suffering's universality, and Islamic integration of divine justice with human responsibility all provide insights that transcend their particular religious frameworks. Modern individuals might benefit from afterlife beliefs that combine therapeutic comfort with existential weight, personal relevance with ultimate significance, emotional support with moral motivation. Such beliefs might acknowledge uncertainty about posthumous experience while maintaining commitment to meaningful earthly existence. They might provide comfort during loss while preserving accountability for behavior. They might offer hope for continuation while accepting responsibility for present choices. The technological future of afterlife beliefs remains unpredictable, but the human psychological needs they address will likely persist regardless of technological capabilities. Even if consciousness can be uploaded to digital platforms, questions about meaning, identity, and value will remain relevant. Even if death can be eliminated through biological or technological means, questions about purpose, relationship, and significance will continue challenging human existence. As we conclude this examination of humanity's afterlife beliefs across cultures and centuries, perhaps the most important insight is is that the questions matter more than the answers. The human confrontation with mortality raises fundamental issues about meaning, morality, identity, and purpose that remain relevant regardless of specific afterlife beliefs. Whether we face Egyptian judgment, Greek twilight, medieval purgatory, Viking combat, Buddhist cycling, Islamic evaluation, or technological uploading, we encounter the same essential human challenges in understanding our existence and its ultimate significance. The afterlife beliefs that have terrified, comforted, and motivated human beings throughout history continue serving psychological and social functions even when their cosmic accuracy remains uncertain. They provide frameworks for understanding death, resources for managing mortality anxiety, motivation for moral behavior, and hope for ultimate meaning. Whether they accurately describe posthumous reality may be less important than whether they help human beings live with dignity, purpose, and connection in the face of inevitable death. So, the next time you contemplate your own mortality and wonder what, if anything, awaits you after death, remember that you're joining a conversation that has engaged every human culture throughout history. Your particular afterlife beliefs, whether traditional or contemporary, religious or secular, terrifying or comforting, connect you to the universal human experience of confronting personal mortality while seeking ultimate meaning. Whether you expect judgment or comfort, continuation or extinction, reward or punishment, you're participating in humanity's longest-running attempt to understand the greatest mystery of conscious existence. Sleep well, knowing that whatever awaits you after death, you'll be joining billions of fellow humans who have wondered about the same questions, feared the same uncertainties, and hoped for the same possibilities. Death may be the ultimate personal experience, but thinking about death is the ultimate shared human activity. Sweet dreams, and try not to worry too much about your cosmic performance review. Everyone else is just as uncertain about the criteria as you are. The afterlife remains the ultimate equal opportunity mystery, where everyone gets to discover the answer eventually, and no one gets to return with reliable information about the experience. Until then, we continue creating beliefs about death that reveal more about human psychology than cosmic reality, serving psychological and social needs that persist regardless of their ultimate accuracy. The greatest afterlife story ever told might be the ongoing human attempt to understand what happens when the story ends. Welcome to the eternal conversation about eternity, where the questions never change, the answers never satisfy everyone, and the uncertainty never ends. But at least we're all uncertain together, which might be the closest thing to afterlife community we can achieve before we discover what, if anything, actually awaits us beyond the final mystery of human existence.